There is a vegetable growing beneath the soil right now that your great-grandparents knew by name. They planted it once and never planted it again. Every year it came back. Every year it multiplied. Every year it fed their families without asking for seeds, without demanding fertilizer, without requiring the endless cycle of buying and planting that modern agriculture has made us believe is normal. This vegetable produced hundreds of pounds of food per year from a single planting. It survived winters that killed other crops. It thrived in soil that commercial varieties would reject. It asked for almost nothing and gave almost everything. And then, somewhere in the last century, it vanished. Not from the earth, but from our memory. It disappeared from seed catalogs. It disappeared from grocery stores. It disappeared from the collective knowledge of how to feed ourselves. Today, most people have never heard its name. Most gardeners have never seen it growing. Most families have no idea that a single afternoon of planting could provide food security for the next 20 years. This is the story of the perennial vegetables that our ancestors depended on. The plants that feed families forever. And the strange reason why you were never taught they exist. Welcome to Nature Hidden Vault. Before we understand what was lost, we need to understand how our ancestors actually grew food. For thousands of years, humans did not plant annual vegetables the way we do today. They did not buy seeds every spring. They did not till the soil every year. They did not start from zero each growing season. Instead, they cultivated perennial food plants, vegetables that came back year after year, roots that multiplied underground, greens that emerged every spring without replanting. This was not primitive gardening. This was intelligent design, a food system that worked with nature instead of against it, a garden that became more productive over time instead of depleting the soil, a way of growing food that required less work each year instead of more. The average annual vegetable garden requires tilling, planting, watering, weeding, and harvesting every single year. If you stop working, the garden stops producing. But a perennial food garden is different. Once established, it produces food whether you tend it or not. The plants spread on their own. They improve the soil as they grow. They create their own mulch from fallen leaves. They require no yearly seed purchases because they regenerate themselves. This is how humans grew food for most of agricultural history. And this is exactly what the modern food system does not want you to know. Consider the Jerusalem artichoke. This plant is native to North America. Indigenous peoples cultivated it for thousands of years before European contact. It produces tubers underground that taste like a cross between potato and artichoke. It is rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. It contains iron, potassium, and B vitamins, and it is one of the most productive food plants ever measured. A single planting of Jerusalem artichoke can produce over 200 pounds of food per year. The tubers multiply underground every season. You harvest what you need and leave the rest to grow next year. The plant comes back stronger each spring. It requires no replanting, no seed purchases, no annual soil preparation. Plant it once and harvest it for 20 years or more. The same is true for Egyptian walking onions. These remarkable plants produce bulbs at the top of their stalks that bend over and plant themselves, walking across the garden over generations. Once established, a patch of walking onions will feed a family indefinitely. The bulbs are pungent and flavorful. The greens can be harvested like scallions. Every part is edible, and every year the patch expands. Then there is sorrel. This perennial green produces tender lemony leaves from early spring through late fall. It returns year after year, from the same roots. A single plant can live for decades producing salad greens without ever being replanted. Rhubarb follows the same pattern. Plant it once and harvest the tart stalks for a lifetime. Asparagus is perhaps the most familiar perennial vegetable. A well-maintained asparagus bed produces spears every spring for 20 to 30 years from a single planting. No annual seeds, no yearly tilling, just harvest after harvest after harvest. Good King Henry was once one of the most important vegetables in Europe. This perennial produced nutritious greens, edible shoots similar to asparagus, and seeds that could be ground into flour. It grew in the same spot for decades. Entire villages depended on it, and today almost no one has heard of it. Sea kale was a prized delicacy in Victorian England. The blanched shoots were considered superior to asparagus. It grew wild on coastal cliffs and was cultivated in estate gardens. It is perennial, beautiful, and delicious. Yet it has virtually disappeared from modern cultivation. Turkish rocket produces abundant greens year after year. Sylveta arugula is a perennial version of the popular salad green. Lovage returns each spring with celery-flavored stalks and leaves. Sorrel, chives, garlic chives, Welsh onions, multiplier onions, and dozens of other perennial vegetables exist that most gardeners have never encountered. These plants share something in common. They cannot be sold to you every year, and that is exactly why you have never heard of them. The modern seed industry is built on annual plants. Every spring, gardeners must purchase new seeds. Every year, the same transaction repeats. This is not an accident. This is a business model. A perennial vegetable that feeds your family for 20 years from a single purchase is a terrible product for a company that wants recurring revenue. You buy it once. They never see you again. Compare this to annual tomatoes, peppers, and squash. Every single year, you return to buy more seeds or transplants. Every season, the cash register rings. Every spring, the dependency continues. The seed industry did not eliminate perennial vegetables through conspiracy. They simply stopped selling them. They focused their breeding programs on annual varieties. They filled their catalogs with plants that needed to be purchased again and again. They let the perennial varieties fade from availability and eventually from memory. This is how erasure works in a market economy. No one bans the superior product. They simply stop offering it. Within a generation or two, the knowledge disappears. Children grow up never knowing that alternatives existed. The annual garden becomes normal because no one remembers anything different. But the erasure went deeper than seed catalogs. Agricultural education shifted entirely toward annual production. Extension services taught farmers to grow corn, wheat, and soybeans, all annual crops that require yearly planting. Home gardening guides focused on tomatoes, beans, and lettuce, annual vegetables that keep gardeners buying seeds. The entire framework of how we think about growing food was redesigned around plants that create dependency rather than plants that create independence. Today, if you ask the average gardener about perennial vegetables, they might mention asparagus, perhaps rhubarb. Beyond that, most draw a blank. The dozens of perennial food plants that sustained our ancestors have been forgotten so completely that their names sound foreign. This forgetting has consequences. Every year, millions of gardeners start from scratch. They buy seeds. They till soil. They plant, tend, and harvest. Then winter comes and the cycle ends. Next spring, they start over. They buy seeds again. They till again. They repeat the same work their grandparents did, and their parents did, and they will do until they stop gardening entirely. Meanwhile, the perennial alternative sits waiting to be rediscovered. A garden that establishes itself in year 1, produces modest harvests in year 2, abundant harvests in year 3, and continues producing for decades. A food system that requires less work over time instead of more. A way of growing that builds soil fertility instead of depleting it. The benefits extend beyond convenience. Perennial vegetables develop deep root systems that access nutrients annual plants cannot reach. They prevent soil erosion by keeping the ground covered year-round. They provide habitat for beneficial insects and soil organisms. They sequester carbon in their permanent root structures. They require no tillage, which preserves soil structure and mycorrhizal networks. A garden full of perennial vegetables is not just a food source. It is an ecosystem. It becomes more alive and more productive with each passing year. The soil improves, the beneficial organisms multiply, the plants adapt to local conditions. What begins as a garden becomes a food forest. So how did we end up with annual vegetables dominating our gardens and grocery stores? The answer involves history, economics, and deliberate choices made by industries that profit from dependency. When commercial agriculture industrialized in the 20th century, the focus shifted to crops that could be mechanized. Annual grains like wheat and corn could be planted and harvested by machines across thousands of acres. Annual vegetables could be grown in controlled conditions, shipped long distances, and sold in supermarkets. Perennial food plants did not fit this model. They could not be harvested by combine. They did not ship well over long distances. They produced food in the same location year after year, making them unsuitable for the industrial model of farming. They were abandoned not because they were inferior, but because they were incompatible with corporate agriculture. Home gardening followed the same pattern. Seed companies found it more profitable to sell annual seeds that needed repurchasing. Garden centers made more money selling transplants every spring. The entire infrastructure of amateur food growing was redesigned around products that generated recurring revenue. The perennial vegetables that had fed families for generations were quietly dropped from catalogs and forgotten. But they never stopped existing. They still grow in forgotten corners of old homesteads. They survive in the gardens of eccentric collectors. They persist in seed libraries and preservation societies. They wait for the day when people remember what their great-grandparents knew, that you can plant once and harvest forever, that food security does not require annual dependency, that the best garden is one that feeds your family for decades from a single season of planting. If you want to break free from the annual cycle, the path is simple. Start with 1 or 2 perennial vegetables. Jerusalem artichokes are nearly indestructible and incredibly productive. Asparagus takes patience but rewards you for decades. Walking onions spread themselves without any help. Sorrel produces greens from early spring through hard frost. Rhubarb asks for almost nothing and gives abundant harvests year after year. Plant them in a permanent location. Give them 1 or 2 seasons to establish. Then watch as your garden transforms from an annual chore into a perennial abundance. Each year the plants will spread. Each year the harvest will increase. Each year your dependency on seed purchases and garden centers will decrease. Within 5 years you will have a food system that feeds your family whether you actively tend it or not. Within 10 years you will have abundance that your neighbors cannot explain. Within 20 years you will have a legacy garden that can be passed to the next generation, already producing, already established, already feeding. This is what they did not want you to know. This is the knowledge that was allowed to fade. This is the secret that makes the seed industry nervous and the garden centers uncomfortable. You do not need to buy seeds every year. You do not need to start over every spring. You do not need to depend on anyone for your family's food security. You simply need to plant perennials. The vegetables exist. The knowledge exists. The only thing missing was awareness. And now you have that too. Remember what they tried to make you forget. There are plants that feed families forever. There are vegetables that never need replanting. There is a way to garden that builds abundance instead of repeating labor. Our ancestors knew this, our great-grandparents practiced it. And now the knowledge returns to you. Plant once, harvest forever. This is not a fantasy. This is how humans grew food for thousands of years before the seed industry convinced us that annual dependency was normal. The perennial vegetables are still here, still growing, still waiting to be remembered. Sunchokes, walking onions, asparagus, rhubarb, sorrel, lavage, good King Henry, sea kale, and dozens more. They cannot be patented because they have been cultivated for centuries. They cannot generate recurring revenue because they only need to be purchased once. And that is exactly why you were never told they exist. But now you know, and knowing changes everything. This is Nature Hidden Vault. If this story changed how you think about your garden, subscribe. More forgotten knowledge is waiting. The vault is open.